DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 30th of August. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
If you want your news to be straight talking,
this is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Patrick Christie's. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threat and so on.
As time passes,
she could have said stump.
You made my argument for me.
My guest and I tackle the issues that really matter with a sharp take on every story.
It went everywhere.
Something practical could be done.
Or I can become something different.
Patrick Christie's tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Neil Oliver, every Sunday night at 6 p.m. on GB News. And if an hour is not nearly enough for you, go to gbnews.com for special extended episodes online every Friday at 9 p.m, where we can truly get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on. GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
It's true.
You're not wrong. No one will be cancelled. Lovely.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Your lunchtime update on the stories that matter across the UK.
From breaking news and insightful analysis, inspiring stories and lively debates. You're comparing yourself to a former Prime Minister.
Which is it?
Stay informed, stay updated, stay entertained.
I just don't know how anyone would not want to be there.
Every weekday from midday.
We are Good Afternoon Britain, only on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Good evening, I'm Christopher Hope, GB News' political editor, standing in for Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg, no less. On State of the Nation tonight, while the country braced itself for what was expected to be 100 protests and potential riots last night, things were thankfully calmer than expected. However, a Labour councillor has been suspended and arrested after saying this last night.
You're disgusting, nothing back, and we need to cut their throats and get rid of them all.
Cut all their throats, blimey. Meanwhile, is your pension safe? The Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, is reportedly considering huge reforms to the UK pension system. But what does this mean for you? And after interviewing him in May about his inspirational return to Parliament after battling sepsis, I'll be speaking to former Tory MP Craig McKinley, soon to be known as the Bionic Peer, as he enters the House of Lords about his next step in his story. State of the Nation starts right now. I'll also be joined by my panel, GB News senior political commentator Nigel Nelson and the journalist and Conservative peer Paul Goodman. In spite of Jacob's absence, the email remains the same. Send me your thoughts to mailmog@gbnews.com. That's all to come after the latest headlines with Cameron Walker.
Chris, thank you. Good evening. It's 1 minute past 8. I'm Cameron Walker here in the GB newsroom. Former President Trump has agreed to debate Vice President Harris on television in the race to the White House. During a press conference at his Mar-a-Lago home in Florida, Donald Trump confirmed he was willing to take part in several debates on different networks in the run-up to November's presidential election. The Republican candidate said he was awaiting a response from Democrat Kamala Harris's campaign, warning there are dark times ahead.
A lot of bad things coming up. You could end up in a depression of the 1929 variety, which would be a devastating thing. Took many years, took decades to recover from it. And we're very close to that, and we're very close to a world war. In my opinion, we're very close to a world war. We have people that don't know how to handle it. They're not respected. All over the world, they're laughed at.
The final child injured in the Southport stabbings has been discharged from hospital and will continue her recovery at home, according to Merseyside Police. 6-year-old BB King, 9-year-old Alice De Silva Aguiar and 7-year-old Elsie Standcombe died after a mass stabbing at a Taylor Swift-themed dance class in the seaside town last month. The family of the injured victim, discharged today, expressed gratitude to the Royal Manchester Children's Hospital for its support and care during what they called this challenging time. Meanwhile, detectives have issued images of 11 more people who may have information following the rioting in Merseyside. Police say members of the public contacted the police, naming people they recognised from yesterday's separate photo appeal, which included images of 14 other people. Merseyside Police have now charged 17 individuals, 7 of whom have already been jailed. They're asking the public to contact them directly or Crime Stoppers anonymously if they recognise any of the people pictured here. In London tonight, the Prime Minister has chaired another Cobra meeting with law enforcement officials to reflect on last night and plan for the coming days, the third high-level gathering of its kind in the last week. He was joined by senior ministers, including the Home Secretary Yvette Cooper, who says the ramped-up police response to potential further riots would continue and suggested it was having an impact on stemming days of disorder. Police had expected more than 100 events and deployed thousands of officers last night. The Prime Minister also said earlier today the additional police presence is having an effect.
The most important lesson is for those involving themselves in disorder. Because what we've seen is that those that are being arrested now, numbered in their hundreds, many have been charged, some already in court, and now a number of individuals sentenced to terms of imprisonment. That is a very important message to those involved in disorder.
A suspended Labour councillor has been arrested after footage emerged of him online in which he allegedly incited the murder of anti-immigration protesters. Met police officers say they arrested a man in his 50s at an address in south-east London under the Public Order Act. He is in custody at South London Police Station. A Labour Party spokesperson previously told GB News that his alleged actions are completely unacceptable and it will not be tolerated. A second Greater Manchester police officer is under criminal investigation for assault after an incident at Manchester Airport last month. It comes after a video emerged of a man appearing to be kicked and punched by a police officer inside a terminal building. The Independent Police Watchdog had previously announced a constable was under a criminal investigation, but says it's since received further referral of a complaint. The second officer is also being investigated for potential gross misconduct for alleged breaches of police professional standards, including use of force. And finally, Great Britain's Ellie Aldridge has become the first ever Olympic gold medalist in kitesurfing at today's event in Marseille. The discipline, which sees competitors fly above the water at up to 40 knots, powered by huge kites, is making its Games debut this year. 27-year-old Aldridge from Dorset powered her way to gold by winning both races in the final series today. Well, those are your latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Cameron Walker. Now it's back to Chris.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Welcome back to State of the Nation. I'm not Jacob Rees-Mogg. I'm Christopher Hope, GB News' political editor. It's been 10 days since the Southport stabbings. We've seen protests, riots and counter-protests all across the country. Last night, police were anticipating as many as 100 protests. As we know, the expected disorder didn't take place, thankfully. Instead, we saw huge counter-protests in places like Walthamstow in East London, Aldershot in Hampshire, and in Bristol in the west of England. Ultimately, it seemed as though there was little to protest against for the anti-fascist protesters. But we're becoming more of that in a moment. Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer pledged to continue supporting law enforcement efforts when asked about whether it was time to address underlying concerns about mass migration.
The first priority is safety and security of our communities. I was very keen that we're able to demonstrate that if you're involved in disorder, within days you'll be in the criminal justice system, and some people starting long terms of imprisonment. That needs to continue, and so that is my sole focus.
Now, Sir Keir Starmer has faced allegations of two-tier policing in recent days. I put this to the senior Labour Minister, Nick Thomas-Symonds, last night on this programme.
I don't accept the idea of two-tier policing. I don't accept the idea of two-tier sentencing. You break the law, you face the consequences. That's the rule of law we have in this country. And what the government is saying today is anyone thinking of going out and committing violent offences, you will feel the full force of that law.
Now, my first guest tonight is Dan Hodges, a senior political journalist on the Daily Mail and the Mail on Sunday. And he's said today in the Daily Mail that the only way to reclaim our streets is by being tough on the causes of extremism. Dan Hodges, welcome to the show. Do you think Labour is right to say it's a far-right issue, or is the problem or concern about migration, if that's what it is, deeper than that?
Yeah, I mean, Labour's definitely right to say it's a far-right issue. I mean, the vast bulk of the violence we've seen, not the entirety, but the vast bulk of it, has quite clearly been organised by the far right. I mean, I've spoken to Labour ministers, I've spoken to previous ministers in the previous administration, Conservative administration, and they all agree on that. But as I said in the piece today, it's not simply a question of tackling, addressing the far right in law and order terms, although obviously that's very, very important. We have to also address the things that give rise to the far right, give succour to the far right, and give oxygen to the far right. And as I said, to use that old sort of Tony Blair phrase, we've got to be tough on far-right extremism and tough on the causes of far-right extremism.
We've heard for a while now from the police. They've been concerned about it for a while, haven't they? Do you think Labour get the concern about migration on the streets, get the concern about the last government's policy of putting migrants in hotels? That was a flashpoint. And are they willing to learn and to listen at some point? Right now, they're just trying to keep the streets safe. We get that.
Yeah, no, they definitely get it. I mean, again, I was speaking to Labour advisors today who were making that point. And actually, if you see right from the beginning, I mean, even in the Queen's speech, Labour and Keir Starmer have put measures at tackling immigration, particularly tackling illegal immigration, have put that at the heart of the Queen's speech. This is definitely something that they understand. But what they've been absolutely very keen, absolutely clear about, is that they've had to firstly get to grips with the issue in law and order terms, and secondly be clear that they don't give any suggestion or any succour to those going out onto the streets that in any way what the violence or the disorder is any way legitimate. But I think you're absolutely right. I think moving forward now, once law and order is restored, then, as I say, we are going to have to start to look at some of the underlying causes. But I do think Labour ministers recognise that. Now, whether or not they can come up with the policy prescriptions to deal with it is obviously a separate issue.
I mean, so far, Keir Starmer is played into his hands. He's a former top prosecutor in the country. He knows how to get the CPS working. Watching people being jailed so rapidly, days after the violence, has been extraordinary. May have contributed to last night's no riots last night, which is great news. I mean, the real challenge for him is the political challenge, which he's less certain on.
Yeah, I mean, there are a number of issues. I mean, as I say in the piece today, I mean, the number of issues. One is obviously the fact that we've seen the way that social media has been utilised. I mean, first in terms of spreading propaganda, but also literally in terms of moving people around, in terms of the rioting on the ground. And one of the things the police have been very alarmed about is the way that the rioters have used social media to, in a sense, stay one step ahead of some of the policing efforts, but especially initially. So that's one of the things they're going to have to look about. The other thing, frankly, that's going to have to be addressed is in my view, there is a social inequality element to this. If you look at where the riots have been taking place, they are, frankly, primarily within white working class communities where there are issues of serious social deprivation. That's going to have to be addressed. And the third issue, obviously, is the underlying tensions that there are in relation to immigration. Now, Labour, obviously, one of the first policies was to scrap the Rwanda scheme. Labour ministers say that's because it was very expensive and wasn't working. But the question
was a deterrent, though, possibly. It was in Ireland,
that's
wasn't
the thing.
it?
I mean, the Labour minister's argument, I think, not necessarily unfairly, was it wasn't much of a deterrent because we hadn't managed to get a single person back to Rwanda. But that's one of the key policy areas that Keir Starmer was going to have to address, and by far, I think, the trickiest one.
And have they got the answers on immigration? They're looking at, I think, houses of multiple occupation, possibly Operation Scatter's being talked about, instead of hotels, putting asylum seekers into the community more than they are at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I know some people are quite concerned about that policy, but I think the key thing is, it is going to come down to whether or not Keir Starmer and Yvette Cooper can get to grips with the small boats issue. I mean, that's the biggest number one issue. Now, we've obviously seen...
Not the biggest, but the most significant.
Yeah,
it's only 50,000 a year compared to hundreds of thousands
no,
of
exactly,
arrived
but
migrants.
I think it's the biggest in political terms, and I think it's the biggest in terms of the underlying discontent that we see. Not discontent from the rioters, we can forget them, but the ordinary law-abiding British citizens who would have nothing to do with the rioting, but there is real concern.
The offer from this country is come across the channel and get put up in a hotel. I mean, it is not hard to understand why it's appealing to come here.
Yeah, I think it's slightly more complicated than that, Chris. I mean, I think it's people are coming here, they're claiming asylum, and they have to be housed whilst.
Yes, of course.
And obviously we have the significant we obviously have the significant backlog which Yvette Cooper and Keir Starmer have inherited. But to come back to the point, you're absolutely right. The key for Labour is they've done away with the Rwanda scheme. They've said it's not working. Keir Starmer has his own plan, which is obviously centred around smashing the criminal gangs. The question will be, obviously they've only been in 4 weeks. When they've been in 4 months, a year, 2 years, will their policy have worked? If it has, they'll get huge political credit for it. If they haven't, then it's going to become a very, very serious political problem.
But so far, maybe Sir Keir Starmer's passed this test, and it was a severe test on his authority in the country.
Yeah, I think it was...
So far,
yeah, it was, exactly. Obviously, we'll have to see how things play out at the weekend, but it was being framed as his first test, and you touched on it. I certainly think that the fast-tracking of the sentences and the sort of the exemplary sentencing that we've put through, I think that did probably have some sort of impact yesterday. And I think that's to Keir Starmer's credit.
Yeah. Dan Hodges, Mail Sunday columnist, thank you for joining us today, and do stay with us. In a moment, we'll be discussing the suspended Labour councillor who called for the throats of the far right to be cut last night. Stay tuned.
Martin Daubney, weekdays from 3 p.m.
A lot of people will be saying 22%, inflation's 2%. This is inflation busting. It's a massive pay rise with £2.7 trillion in national debt and rising. This costs £1 billion a year, £5 billion over the term of the Labour government. Why on earth do junior doctors deserve it?
Junior doctors have been overworked and underpaid for many years now. And in the UK, good health in our population is the bedrock for getting the UK economy growing again back to its best. So we need an NHS that's able to deliver elective care for our parents, operations, A&E service when our children need it. And that means we need doctors in our hospitals, paid fairly, motivated to be there, rather than leaving for Australia, which many of my colleagues have been doing throughout the year that I've been working. So I think we need to invest in our health service. This is a crucial first step to do so.
What about the notion that a lot of people are saying, wow, hey presto, as if by magic, this has been resolved 5 minutes into a Labour term. Is there a political element to this? Were the junior doctors and the unions simply unprepared to negotiate with the Conservatives, and as soon as Labour get in, wallop, it's a done deal?
I think there were really genuine frustrations felt by junior doctors over recent years, exhaustion off the back of COVID and previously, but also the sense that pay wasn't keeping up with cost of living. And this is the first pay deal that listens to those concerns seriously, that embeds a pay rise that considers that, but also that talks about other concerns. So rotational training around the country that took where people live out of their control, sending people off to Plymouth with a few weeks' notice. I think that this deal puts staff wellbeing first and therefore puts our patients' wellbeing first as well.
GB News, the People's Channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Weekdays on GB News. Wake up to breakfast every day from 6 a.m. Followed by Britain's newsroom at 9:30. At noon, it's Good Afternoon Britain. Followed by Martin Daubney from 3 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, and as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Welcome back to State of the Nation with me, Christopher Hope. We've been discussing the riots and protests across the country, and you've been getting in touch with your views. Clifford says, do you think that Keir Starmer is going to have problems with the European Convention on Human Rights regarding these changes? Does this process allow the accused to plan a proper defence? That's the speeded up justice we discussed with Dan Hodges. And is the sentencing a knee-jerk process rather than political action? We appear to be sleepwalking into a police state apparently directed and controlled by the government. Mike says the very term used by Keir Starmer, our communities, indicates that our multiculturalism has failed. We are no longer one society, but a disparate group of series of disparate groups who often do not find coexistence to their liking. There are considerable dangers ahead, and the iron fist is not the answer. Now, thankfully, the scenes we saw last night did not live up to the police's concerns, with barely a quarter of the 160 protests planned taking place. Instead, we saw a number of counter-protests everywhere from anti-fascist demonstrators across the country. However, more could take place tonight. GB News revealed earlier today that a Labour councillor, Ricky Jones, councillor for Dartford, has been suspended by his party following these remarks at a supposedly anti-fascist protest.
We've got children and women using those trains destroying the summer relatives. They are disgusting, nasty bastards, and we need to cull their throats and get rid of them all. I just want to say thank you all. I'm going to leave it now. And free, 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 Palestine, free, free, Palestine, free, free, Palestine. Thank you. God bless you all.
So after saying that, Ricky Jones says, God bless you all. A Labour spokesman said this behaviour is completely unacceptable and will not be tolerated. The councillor has been suspended from the party. Now, the man was subsequently arrested. I'm joined now by my panel, GB News senior political commentator Nigel Nelson and the journalist and Conservative peer Paul Goodman. Nigel Nelson, to you first. Labour was quick to act on that, weren't they?
Yes, they were. And absolutely right. There have been too many allegations about two-tier policing, two-tier Keir, that kind of thing. It was important the moment that something like this happens, they clamp down on it immediately. And the police are doing the same thing, that they've arrested him now, and we'll see what happens next.
Yeah, I worry, though, Paul Goodman. I mean, you've got, you know, it's all sides saying these things. And when you hear from Sir Keir Starmer talking about the far right and violence, that is frustrating to some people, I think.
The authorities will have been very keen to dispel this two-tier policing claim, in which many people, not just in the far right, think there's something in it for a variety of reasons. So they went in this case. What struck me about it as really extraordinary and quite worrying was this chanting of free, free Palestine. You might ask, what on earth has the Palestine issue got to do with violence here committed by the far right or the far left, or
triggered
anyone?
by those dreadful killings in Southport. Nothing to do, as far as we know, with Palestine.
So,
as far as we know.
There is two levels to all this. There's the criminality, which simply must be cracked down when it's committed by anyone. I think the government so far have done a halfway decent job on it, but then there's this tangled question of the causes, and it's deeply worrying to me to think of a future where you're going to have far-right gangs wandering around in a dangerous way and doing deadly things, and Islamist gangs doing the same.
That's right, isn't it? I mean, don't you think, Nigel Nelson, the government's got to recognise there is violence on both sides?
Well,
I mean, the attacks on a mosque were clearly by the far right.
Yeah, exactly.
We've seen also videos elsewhere in Birmingham this week, haven't we?
We have, and there was violence there, but I mean, nothing like the degree of it. What we're talking about here is the worst riots since 2011. So it is perfectly right for Keir Starmer to crack down on that. He must deal with the rioters themselves, stop it in its tracks. And so you can't make comparisons with, say, the pro-Palestinian marchers. They haven't torn the country apart. Black Lives Mattered and caused the same kind of mayhem that these people are. They're the ones we must focus on. Hopefully things are dying down, but we won't know till the weekend comes whether they actually have.
I mean, back in 2011, 3,000 arrests, so far 500, so we're barely a sixth of where we went to, thank goodness, in 2011. 2,000 facing criminal charges back in 2011. What's happening here, Paul Goodman? Are people testing out the authority of a new government? Are they concerned about the axing of the Rwanda plan? What's Labour's answer on migration? What is happening? Are we being too intellectual about it?
We don't know yet whether this is simply a summer riot that will vanish, which is basically what happened to the 2011 riots. I mean, after that, you know, nothing for, as you say, it's triggered by killing. And, you know, a horrible business at that. We don't know whether the violence will die away or whether it's going to come back in one form or another. I'm not very optimistic, and I don't entirely agree with what Nigel has just said. Now, of course, the violence has been largely from the far right, but there has been some from the far left. The smashing up, for example, of Barclays Bank, well attested. And you've had the presence of those Hizb ut-Tahrir protesters talking in very openly, flagrantly anti-Semitic terms on the pro-Palestinian marches in London. So the potential for violence isn't just one way, and it's very important for the government to be clearly against it wherever it comes from.
To Nigel, people are conflating different ideas, aren't they?
Yeah, they are, basically, yeah. I mean, that's what I mean. Let's take this in stages, and the first stage surely must be to clamp down on the far-right protesters who have launched a campaign of street violence. That's stage one. Then we'll deal with the other things along the way.
Actually, I think the first stage is to make it clear that no violence would be acceptable for wherever it comes from. Now, it happens that most of the people involved in the riots, the vast majority, have been far right. So they must be clamped down on, there's no question about that. But when there's thuggery and violence from the other side, and there has been some of that, that must be too.
Well, absolutely. I mean, the whole thing is that there shouldn't be a two-tier policing. It should be equal on both sides. The point I'm making is that it's the far right which are causing the majority of the mayhem at the moment.
Yeah. OK, listen, we'll move on now. Now, sharing of online footage of the rioting could be a criminal offence, according to the head of the Crown Prosecution Service, Stephen Parkinson, the Director of Public Prosecutions. Of course, the Prime Minister was previously a DPP. He said that if any of the footage is found to incite racial hatred, then those who share it could be breaking the law. Dedicated police officers will be scouring social media, Mr Parkinson said. Let's have a listen.
The offence of incitement to racial hatred involves publishing or distributing material which is insulting or abusive, which is intended to or likely to start racial hatred. So if you retweet that, then you're republishing that, and then potentially you're committing that offence. And we do have dedicated police officers who are scouring social media. Their job is to look for this material and then follow up with identification, arrests and so forth.
Still with me is Nigel Nelson and Paul Goodman, Lord Goodman. Paul Goodman, you're a legislator, you're in the House of Lords. Are you comfortable with that kind of thing, about the idea of retweeting could give you a criminal
I think it's possible to get far too complicated and difficult about this. There are laws against inciting racial hatred. You shouldn't incite violence. If you do it on social media, as anywhere else, you're breaking the law. End of story.
But so just retweeting, and some people retweet by mistake. They're reading a tweet, or forgive me using social media terms, but they're reading a message and they by mistake push a button.
That's something the authorities should look at when they're investigating the case. But I don't think there's some sort of magic about social media that insulates it from the incitement of violence. If you incite violence, you're inciting violence.
Yeah, I agree with every word of that. That people don't understand that when they post on social media, they're not chatting to a mate.
They're publishing.
They're publishing. They're publishing. The same laws of publishing apply. I mean, a Labour MP today, Lauren Edwards, has just fallen foul of that, where she put some offensive tweets up 10 years ago, now has to apologise for it profusely.
15 years ago, a long time ago.
Oh, 15 years ago. Well, anyway, but a long time ago. But she still has to apologise for it. Point really, this is not an attack on free speech. Free speech must be used responsibly, and we have laws to control free speech. You can't use it as a cover for anti-Semitism, for Islamophobia. We have contempt of court laws to ensure fair trials, libel laws to stop people being defamed. So on that basis, free speech always has some restrictions on it, and it is not absolute.
Elon Musk has got involved with it, with those remarks by Stephen Parkinson, hasn't he, and said, seriously...
Well, he has, and I think this reinforces, without becoming a kind of echo chamber on the panel, this reinforces the point Nigel's making. I mean, Twitter, together with WhatsApp groups and TikTok, and quite why we allow TikTok to operate as it does, I don't know. Twitter has been
It's Chinese-owned.
It's Chinese-owned. Twitter has been, or X as it now is, has played an extraordinary part in the last week, because Musk's philosophy is just basically that anything goes. And that sounds great. Free speech, who's against free speech?
Yeah.
But when it crosses the line and you're inciting violence, which you're not allowed to do in any context, then you're in very dangerous territory. And I think that's what's happening here.
Taking a step back, Nigel Nelson, the way that the courts have processed prosecutions and we have people in jail for trouble in the past week it appears to have been effective so far. It may have worked to dispel violence yesterday. This is a kind of a place where the PM, Keir Starmer, is comfortable. He knows how the CPS works, the former DPP. He's done OK so far, has he?
Yeah, I'd have thought.
9 days, 10 days into this crisis.
I'd have thought he has. And I think that we have to be careful by suggesting that what didn't happen last night is to do with that. I mean, the idea that they could have hit 100 places seems to me overly ambitious and a bit of a sort of feint attack, frankly. So until the weekend comes, we don't know whether we're actually on the home straight yet. But yes, as far as what Keir Starmer said he would do, he's done.
He's done the stuff he can do.
Yep, he's putting people in jail. He's putting them in jail quickly. That's how he started out, and that should be the first stage. The urgency of this is to stop people rioting. That's the best way to do it.
But the political challenge, which he might find harder for him, is the causes. How do you deal with why this happened?
I'm a bit worried about a pendulum effect. I mean, only a few days ago, the general cry was, the far right are on the march. They're coming to, take us all in our beds. There's nothing that can be done to stop them. Today, because of what happened last night, it's they're a paper tiger. Nobody really supports them. It's all over. You swing from one to the other, and the government, whoever it is, has got a very difficult job treading a line in the middle and making sure that those who break the law are punished without fear or favour.
That's right. Well, Paul Goodman and Nigel Nelson, thank you. Thanks to my panel. Next, we're discussing the future of your pensions. Will it be safe under the new Labour government? Find out in a moment.
Good evening. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update brought to you from the Met Office. The grey weather will linger across the south first thing tomorrow, but in general, it's looking much brighter as we head into Friday. That's because a cold front will clear through the country overnight tonight and into tomorrow morning, introducing fresher air. But before then, we've still got the milder, humid air through the rest of this evening and overnight. So quite a close night to come. Persistent rain still continuing through this evening across northeastern areas, but that will linger across the south and east until Friday morning, making for a fairly grey start here tomorrow morning. Temperatures already in the high teens as well. Slightly fresher further north for much of Northern Ireland and Scotland, and here there will be plenty of sunshine, or more in the way of sunshine compared to today at least. Still a few showers though, potentially some heavier ones affecting the Northern Isles first thing tomorrow. They could push into parts of south of western Scotland as well, but it does look like it will remain largely dry across Northern Ireland, eastern areas of Scotland, the south east as well. Northeastern England not looking too bad, as well as Wales and the southwest. Plenty of sunshine first thing, and it's going to be turning much brighter across the southeast towards lunchtime as well, once that rain does clear away. So certainly a brighter day to come tomorrow, and it will feel fairly warm in the sunshine as well. However, across the far north, that's where we've got a bit of a breeze and this risk of showers through the day. So here still that fresher feel, temperatures in the mid-teens, but further south we're towards the mid-20s so not feeling too bad, especially where the winds remain light. Another change on the way as we head into the weekend. Another band of rain arrives across parts of England and Wales, bringing outbreaks of rain showers continuing across Scotland. But it will brighten up for many areas into the afternoon, and again feeling fairly warm in the sunshine too. But it's Sunday and Monday when the temperatures really start to climb. Plenty of sunshine around through these days and temperatures towards the low 30s.
I'm Patrick Christie's. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threats on.
As time passes,
She could have said storm.
You made my argument for me.
My guest and I tackle the issues that really matter with a sharp take on every story.
Went everywhere.
something practical could be done.
Or I can become something different.
Patrick Christie's tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry, Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to State of the Nation with me, Christopher Hope, GB News' political editor. We've been discussing the government's response to the riots after the killings of 3 children in Southport last week, and you've been getting in touch with your views. Ian takes issue with me. He says about me, you keep saying tweets. Am I a Luddite or just failing to keep up with modernity? It's X. For goodness sake. Well, Ian's not blowing me a kiss. It's called X, Twitter, but I would say that not the entire world knows what a tweet is, but perhaps that's just me, Ian. John says, Chris, can't help wondering if the number of suspected protests were accurate. He thinks the number was inflated to make it look as though the government and police had quelled the rebellion. If not, then the intelligence was extremely poor, which is worrying. Now, moving on, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rachel Reeves, is in North America, and she's indicated that there may be a big change to come to the pension system. On a visit there, she met with Canadian pension bosses amid talk of her plans to try and overhaul what we do with pensions. So, what do they do differently across the pond? In short, and bear with me, public sector pensions can be amalgamated, consolidated into bigger funds that are then invested in assets like gas networks, airports and shopping centres. So big companies invest in public infrastructure and get a return back, and it's a safe way of putting pension money aside. Is this what we need to get Britain building again? I'm still joined by my panel here in the studio, GB News senior political commentator Nigel Nelson and the journalist and Tory peer Paul Goodman. Nigel, to you first. You've been around the houses longer than me in politics, and I've heard this idea going back some years. It makes a bit of sense.
Yeah, it has been going on for some time. That Jeremy Hunt was looking at it. Prior to that, Rishi Sunak looked at
and George Osborne, I'm sure, did it.
Yeah, I'm not sure about George Osborne, but certainly Rishi did after COVID, and the idea was to get the money into the long-term asset fund, which would build things like HS2 and the third runway at Heathrow, neither of which, of course, seem to be happening. The idea of this is, the way the Canadians do it is that they invest rather in stocks and shares, they invest in private companies. So one of the teaching pension funds in Canada owns 25% of the British energy giant SSE.
Yes.
Another one is a big investor in Thames Water.
So they invest in private companies, do they?
Yeah. So some companies do well. Thames Water clearly is not doing well. The key to a pension fund is it must be there to give a decent retirement to existing pensioners and future ones. And what Rachel Reeves has to actually sort out is to make sure that you get that return. And the big question is, if the return from investing in infrastructure is so great, why aren't they doing it now?
Paul Goodman, is this a way of getting bridges built without the state paying for it?
I mean, the question that your viewers will want to know if they've got a public sector pension is, will my pension be better invested under these plans or not? Nigel has put his finger on the point, which is you don't know. So it sounds great. Take British pension money, put it all together into building British things, and banks, all of that. Well, quite. Sounds great. But what happens if the return is not as great, or worse, if your airport project or your infrastructure project goes bust? What happens to your pension money then? And this is why I suspect, Jeremy Hunt and previous chancellors have looked at this with enthusiasm and then kind of rubbed their chins and thought, this is a bit tricky. So we now have to see if Rachel Rees can do a better job than they did.
The problem with pensions is it's a live rail in politics right now, isn't it? After the government decided to remove, to go after pensioners and the warm winter fuel discount.
Yes, we'll have to see if she actually carries that out.
So pensions feel a bit under fire, I think, from this government, and that's why I think that's what's happening here. That's why people are leaping on it.
Yes, I mean, the idea of using huge pension funds, I mean, in this case, we're talking about the local government schemes. Now, if you take them collectively, that is the biggest pension fund in this country, I think 7th biggest in the world. So it's a huge amount of money. And if you could actually use that for infrastructure projects, the wind farms and the solar farms that Rachel Rees wants to build, that could actually help economic growth. But your point and Paul's point is absolutely right. The most important thing is the pensioners themselves have got to be safe. I used to work for Robert Maxwell. He nicked my pension, so I know what it feels like to lose it. It was not funny, no.
Not at all. I mean, but some of these pension funds invest in shopping centres, many of which are now going bust around the country. So,
and that's the danger. I mean, the sort of Thatcher philosophy, which is very much contested now, was if you had funds, you invested them where you got the best return, even if it was abroad. And that's what's being contested. Is it better abroad or better here? Just sort of finally, I think you made a very good point about the context of the government's approach to pensioners, because no one can quite work out why they did this thing about the winter fuel payment now, rather than in their financial statement in the autumn.
No, Nigel, it appears like they made a choice, didn't they, last Monday, when they give public sector workers a £10 billion pay rise and take money off pensions, and that's how it looks, the politics of
No, it does, and I was really surprised about it. I was really surprised she did what she did. I'm assuming that she desperately needed that money, 1.5 billion this year, 1.7 next year. The point, what somebody like Ross Altman, the previous pension minister, would say is, what you could do is increase the state pension by that £300 of the winter fuel allowance and tax it. And so better off pensioners would then be paying tax on it, and you'd recoup your money that way. And you wouldn't get as much, of course.
And Labour figures, I think Darren Jones has said something like it wasn't going to happen in opposition, hasn't he? I mean,
well, parties in opposition say all sorts of things.
When
they're in government, extraordinary. Never dreamt it was there for a moment. And of course, it is a way, just as to be fair, in 2010.
But she's got to be creative, hasn't she? I mean, she's in America right now. She's got a budget in early October. She's got to find new ways to
with pensions,
raise money.
I mean, I don't think, for instance, the triple lock is going to last forever. It sounds like it'll last the term of this government, but I don't know what would happen in the next 5 years. At the moment, it just seems to be the cost of it is so huge, and at times it's not justifiable. So getting rid of the 2.5% guarantee might be the way round it by keeping...
a double lock?
Yeah, so earnings and inflation, the pensioners will always get the higher of those two, but you'd forget about the 2.5%.
You're going to go somewhere there eventually. Yes.
Paul Goodman, Nigel Nelson, thank you again. And thank you to my panel. Up next, I'll be catching up with Westminster's new bionic lord, Craig McKinley, who has kindly joined me on my podcast to discuss his recent peerage and his plans for the future. Stay tuned.
Good afternoon, Britain. Weekdays from midday.
It's a very difficult issue, this, right? As far as we know, the boxer with male chromosomes was born with female genitalia.
Yeah, I mean, it's actually quite simple. Sex in humans is binary and immutable because we are mammals. And there is a minority of people who have disorders of sexual development, and that can affect a person's reproductive organs. But these people are male or female. And yesterday, what we witnessed was basically just glorified male violence against women and girls. The difference is, that happens every day all over the world. And the difference is that in every other circumstance, we consider beating up women to be wrong, but it was deemed acceptable by those at the IOC because they're claiming that it's sport, but it's not. It's violence, and it's wrong.
Peter, Lottie's right, isn't she, that we've been talking a lot recently about violence against women and girls, and regardless of whether this person is intersex or transgender, they have male chromosomes. That means they have a very, very distinct biological advantage that could actually be fatal to a female athlete competing against them.
Well, of course, sport does need to be fair, and we do need to examine this case very thoroughly. There are reports that the boxer, Iman Khalif, was born a biological woman. She is not transgender. She is not non-binary. She is not intersex. She may have elevated levels of testosterone, but that's entirely natural. It's beyond her control. It's the way she was born. And that is why the International Olympic Committee has said that she falls within the rules.
GB News, the People's Channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking, this is a nightmare for the Conservatives again. Down to earth. It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it? And most importantly, honest. Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them. They catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Neil Oliver, every Sunday night at 6 p.m. on GB News. And if an hour is not nearly enough for you, go to gbnews.com for special extended episodes online every Friday at 9 p.m, where we can truly get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on. GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to State of the Nation. We've been discussing how your pensions could be used to get the economy motoring, and you've been getting in touch with your views. Linda says, can somebody tell Nigel Nelson there's no teachers' pension fund to invest? It comes from present teachers and goes out to retired teachers, apparently, Nigel.
That's in Ontario I was talking about.
Oh, he's from Ontario, thank you. Very good. And Bridget says, investing in private sector is not secure. I'm a pensioner who will lose their heating allowance. Don't trust Labour with our money. They lied in the election mandate. I worked from the age of 17 to 77. Well, Bridget, well done and thank you. Now, back in May, I interviewed Craig McKinley, then a Tory MP, on GB News. He opened up about his battle with sepsis, which resulted in a quadruple amputation of both his arms and both his legs. But Craig's story was ultimately one of resilience and inspiration. We discussed his road to recovery and the incredible support of his wife, Cotty. And when the general election was called, Craig decided that fighting for his seat was too difficult in such a short time frame. He's since been granted a peerage. I caught up with him today to discuss his next challenge as the Bionic Lord.
Craig McKinley, welcome to Chopper's Political Podcast. How are you?
I'm pretty good, really, all things considered, having lost 4 of my limbs, arms and legs, to sepsis at the end of last year. But yeah, we're up and running. Unfortunately, didn't feel well enough to fight the election, as you know. But, you know, life brings you different turns, and this, in my view, is another chapter, and I'm going to make the most of it.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we last met, didn't we, on the day that Rishi Sunak called that election that I certainly was not expecting, and many people weren't, including yourself, I think, because you had hoped to fight a November general election, but frankly, July was too soon after what happened to you last year.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, it would be a tough election, as it would have been. Mine would have been classed as a marginal seat. It would have had to be one of those elections you've really got to fight tooth and nail for. And yeah, it is not an easy task running elections. And you know, realistically, even being an MP, even if you're lucky enough to get re-elected, it's not an easy job. We're talking 80, 90-hour week of work, constituency work, and all the rest of it. I may have been kidding myself that I'd have been ready in November, but the ball would have been in my court to give it a little bit more time to consider it. And it would have been nice to have had those few months in Parliament to pursue some of the issues of prosthetics provision within the NHS, which frankly in my view is pretty poor at the moment, and raising awareness of sepsis. It would give me a few more months as an MP to do that. But as you know, I'm going to a different place, so my voice will still be heard.
We'll come to that in a second. Your party lost your seat, didn't they, in the election, even though you did some door knocking with your prosthetic arms?
Yes, they did. I mean, we had a pretty adverse boundary change. I never quite understood why the boundary change was necessary, but there's probably lots of MPs feel that. We lost the sandwich bit in the villages and gained a lump of Margate. So it was an adverse boundary change in terms of what it should be. But yes, we did lose it and lost it, I'm afraid, fairly heavily. A big Reform vote. We came second and Reform were third, but obviously, as in many places, the Reform vote plus Conservative would have been enough to get it over the line on the assumption that all Reform voters are, shy Conservatives, as it were, which is not always quite the truth. But Reform had a big role to play. There was a new candidate, no incumbency, all of that sort of stuff. Perhaps I'd have got it over the line, but perhaps that's wishful thinking as well. But we'll never know. That is the sliding doors moment.
When you were an MP, of course, you chaired the Net Zero Scrutiny Group. That, I imagine, has been wound up now. I mean, there's barely a rump of MPs left. You can get them onto a couple of large buses now, can't you, compared to where you were before the election?
Yeah, it is a shame. We did lose a lot of very good colleagues that were obviously very strong on the net zero argument, net zero scrutiny group members, and of course ERG members often went hand in hand, what I'd call the right thinking core of the Conservative Party. But no, the net zero scrutiny group will continue. We had a number of peers in it before, and I intend it to continue, and perhaps even standing up with some external funding, if we can find it, as a proper group to actually tell the story to new parliamentarians about why the current thinking is so woolly and so wrong and so costly, and there's a better way of doing all this.
Well, certainly it's going to be quite a dash for Green. You've been following the riots since those dreadful killings in Southport last week, Craig McKinley. Are you comfortable about the blame on the far right? A lot of viewers, listeners to GB News are concerned about the idea that the government's been willing to say it's just the far right. And that almost says if you're worried about immigration, it's a far right issue. And of course, as we know, it's a wider issue and a deeper issue than just one held by some thugs on the far right.
Well, I mean, if the far right are that good at organising things, then they're far better at organising things than any political party or government that I know in the UK. So I actually don't believe fully. I mean, there's always going to be some nutters, and they should be dealt with very robustly, and they should be in prison where appropriate. I'm fully in favour of all of that. But if you look at some of these, rallies that are going on, there are lots of couples on these rallies that you'd expect to go and see in the dog and duck on a Friday afternoon. These are normal people, and I think what happened with Southport, it's sort of culminated what I feel is a deep malaise in this country, a deep worry. And it sort of brought it together in an unexpected way. And I'm afraid that's how things often happen. It's like the butterfly wings in Brazil create a storm in Africa. This is almost one of those moments where I think a lot of people have said, forget what the Southport was actually all about. It actually made people rather annoyed about the state of Britain today.
Yeah, so Craig McKinley, you're saying there that it's not really a far-right issue to be worried about immigration. Look at the numbers who flocked to Reform UK. But isn't this this government's been there for a month? I mean, maybe if they've had a slightly stuttering response to it in messaging, all the problems were laid for them by the Tory government with these hotels where migrants were being housed and the like, and allowing such large numbers to come through the front door legally as migrants as much as illegally.
Yeah, well, you've got two bases there. Yeah, we've got the boats, the illegal migration, and then you've got the enormous numbers of legal migration.
And that's on your party, Craig.
I know it is, and I'm not proud of it. I've never supported it, and I've been very robustly against all of these vast numbers that have been coming in. I mean, I've made a very easy connection. We have got 9.4 million people in this country who are of working age, who are economically inactive. I mean, surely we've got a pool of workers available domestically to actually fill the jobs that are available. We've still got a very buoyant economy.
But even the cuts proposed by the Tory government in the manifesto were just marginal cuts at the returning the country to 2019 levels.
I mean, I'm sorry, because I'm not going to defend the outgoing government on their on what they did on DWP or immigration.
Do you think this Labour government has got it in it to do the cuts to welfare required that you're describing?
Well, they've done a very strange cut to welfare, haven't they? I mean, this cutting of 10 million pensioners from their £200 or £300 winter fuel allowance it is a very bizarre move. And you would think with their political head on, it's perhaps not the demographic of people. Often they can't do anything to improve their lot in terms of extra work, overtime or anything else.
I've got to ask you about Brexit. As one of the 28 Spartan Tory MPs who opposed all the iterations of Theresa May's Brexit deal, is Brexit under threat?
It worries me greatly, actually. I mean, you've got to worry about Keir Starmer himself when he was the shadow Europe secretary in opposition. I mean, he opposed everything to do with Brexit, did everything they possibly could to frustrate it, stop it, and everything else. I don't think he has changed at all. But what was very worrying just last week was the abolition of the European Scrutiny Committee, the one that I sat on for many years with Sir Bill Cash. Sir Bill Cash had been on it, I think, since he'd been in Parliament. It had been in place since 1973 to actually scrutinise what was coming through the door from Brussels.
Craig McKinley, it's great to see you looking so well, sounding so well, and we can't wait to see you back in Parliament in the middle of October. Thanks for joining us today on Chopper's Political Podcast. Thank you.
Thank you.
The rather inspirational Craig McKinley, soon Lord McKinley there, talking to me for my podcast, Chopper's Political Podcast, out tomorrow morning. That's all from me. Up next is my pal, Patrick Christis. Patrick, what's coming up in your show?
Well, we've got a heck of a lot on tonight. So Keir Starmer said he'd smash the gangs repeatedly, didn't he? We've got an exclusive tonight, right at the start of the show, in a few minutes' time, which actually shows that violent gangs are now in charge of the Calais beaches. Are we being told the full story about last night's demonstrations as well, or is there something a little bit weird going on? We're going to be getting stuck into that. The Manchester airport incident, well, the police are now investigating another officer. Well, I think that raises serious questions over two-tier policing. The ISIS threat, is it back? Did it ever go away? Taylor Swift has had to cancel a few concerts in Vienna, but she is coming here this month to do some more concerts here. So how worried or otherwise should we be? And Banksy, he didn't last long in Peckham, Christopher, but I think anyone could have told him that.
Splendid, Patrick. That's coming up after the weather with Annie Shuttleworth. I've been presenting State of the Nation with my friend Jacob Rees-Mogg. He's back on Monday at 8 p.m. Do tune in. You won't want to miss it. Thank you for tuning in. It's been great to be here for the last couple of days, and hopefully I'll be back here with you again soon.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good evening. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update brought to you from the Met Office. The grey weather will linger across the south first thing tomorrow, but in general, it's looking much brighter as we head into Friday. That's because a cold front will clear through the country overnight tonight and into tomorrow morning, introducing fresher air. But before then, we've still got the milder, humid air through the rest of this evening and overnight. So quite a close night to come. Persistent rain still continuing through this evening across northeastern areas, but that will linger across the south and east until Friday morning, making for a fairly grey start here tomorrow morning. Temperatures already in the high teens as well. Slightly fresher further north for much of Northern Ireland and Scotland, and here there will be plenty of sunshine, or more in the way of sunshine compared to today at least. Still a few showers though, potentially some heavier ones affecting the Northern Isles first thing tomorrow. They could push into parts of south of western Scotland as well, but it does look like it will remain largely dry across Northern Ireland, eastern areas of Scotland, the south east as well. Northeastern England not looking too bad, as well as Wales and the southwest. Plenty of sunshine first thing, and it's going to be turning much brighter across the southeast towards lunchtime as well, once that rain does clear away. So certainly a brighter day to come tomorrow, and it will feel fairly warm in the sunshine as well. However, across the far north, that's where we've got a bit of a breeze and this risk of showers through the day. So here still that fresher feel, temperatures in the mid-teens, but further south we're towards the mid-20s. So not feeling too bad, especially where the winds remain light. Another change on the way as we head into the weekend. Another band of rain arrives across parts of England and Wales, bringing outbreaks of rain showers continuing across Scotland. But it will brighten up for many areas into the afternoon, and again feeling fairly warm in the sunshine too. But it's Sunday and Monday when the temperatures really start to climb. Plenty of sunshine around through these days and temperatures towards the low 30s.
Looks like things are heating up. Box boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
We could be calling you with the news that you've won our latest Great British giveaway. An incredible £30,000 in tax-free cash. David from Kent was our last big winner. Listen to